Okay, we're going to get going. Welcome, everybody. It is wonderful to see so many friendly faces, people that I know, many members of these project teams all here because of a great deal of work that's happened over the last year or 18 months. My name is Erin Driver-Lynn. We have a speaker series in HILT that we try to do once a semester. We think of this speaker series as a way to bring in members of our community or people from outside who are scholars doing their own work and who are applying something in their scholarship or loosely related to their scholarship to teaching and learning improvement. And this time around, we were thinking we should maybe have a separate event for curriculum mapping instead of doing our usual speaker series where we would feature one person. Instead, we said, why not? This kind of fits in our speaker series theme. But how in the world are we going to have all of these people speak and be able to get through all of these ideas? So we feel with a little bit of misgivings. Today, I'm going to be emceeing and walking through a lot of projects that don't represent my thinking or my work at all, and instead represent the fine ideas of these people, and hope that I can get most of it right, that we can get a kind of overview, and then we're going to pull out a couple of different projects for a little bit of a deeper dive. Before we go into each of these individual projects, there's a couple of other things that I want to do. So I want to give a little bit of organizational context and the story of how we came to begin using this term curriculum mapping and begin putting all of these projects together. And then we're going to really focus for a while on the data infrastructure and the kind of tools and ways of thinking and data sources that we think will help amplify all of these projects moving forward and hopefully catalyze many of you to be thinking of other sorts of curriculum mapping kinds of work. And for that part of today's agenda, Dustin is going to run through some of the mini tools that he's been working on. And then we hope to have quite a bit of time for Q&A. One of the things that I think is really important for us to try to get to in the question and answer time is what's the upshot of all of these? How do we pull the picture together with all of these different kinds of projects and understand from a broader perspective where the university ought to be around making the curriculum visible for students, for faculty, and for administrators. And then finally, we'll have a reception where people can talk with one another. And if you find that there's something particularly interesting about one of these projects or a question that you have, that you'll be able to identify the people who you'll see their faces on the screen, or you may see them up here, and go up and talk with them and see if there's some way that there's an action item coming out of the work that you can see in your roles with members of these teams. So the story of curriculum mapping. Overheard in the yard in 2016. I don't even know why I was required to take a course before this one. It didn't really help prepare me. I asked the professor and he said he didn't really know either. He said he was told it should be listed as a prereq when he started here and was asked to take over teaching the course. So this is slightly outside of the yard where I heard it, and this is a paraphrase. I didn't actually, take the quote down, but the three parts of this I overheard, which was a student saying he didn't understand why he was having to take something as a prerequisite, and saying that the professor didn't know either, and then the inherited part, that the professor inherited the course. And so all of these things, I think, are related to how a curriculum evolves and how it may have started with an intentional plan within a department, say, and then it evolves over time in a way that we've lost the thread, so that students and faculty and decision makers who are administrators in the department no longer know why these sequences go together, why courses go together. And we certainly don't have an insight often into the kinds of things that are being taught in someone else's course that may have a title even very similar to the one that we're teaching. Hearing this and similar kinds of things, I became more attuned to the work that other people were doing that seemed like it was addressing this kind of a set of problems. And then I was at a reception at MIT, and I met a faculty member there named Karen Wilcox, who is a professor of aeronautical engineering, and she was working with a bunch of MIT students to really carefully map their curriculum. So that got me super excited, and we brought Karen over for a speaker series, 3 speaker series ago, and I thought, this is our solution. You know, Karen's architecture and what she's working on, we can just import it here. And so we tried to do that, and it didn't work, because we're Harvard, and we're not like MIT, and I should have known that, and of course I do know that, but we instead, I think, have to do it a different way, which is to identify all of the different kinds of curricular mapping exercises, and then think about how do they individually sum up to something that we can take and think about systematic ways of making the curriculum more visible. So part of what we were doing initially was having a small working group that got together, and then the working group began to expand. And it is continued to expand, and players in this picture have come in and out, and there are probably slots there that we could put different faces. And then at different times when we've tried to explain how these curriculum mapping projects may or may not go together, I've bucketed them. And these are 2 buckets, ways that we've tried to bucket them. It's imperfect, but we're going to try to follow along a little bit as a way to give a structure to all of these 10 projects. So projects addressing content that's taught across Harvard schools, and projects addressing student learning and enrollment patterns within subjects is the way we're talking about this. So we have this working group, and then we have an organization that holds many organizations in the Office of the President and Provost. And our role within the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning umbrella is to try to help the schools who are working on their own teaching and learning efforts, and we do so in different ways in these different organizations. So HILT, our role, I'll say a little bit more about HILT in a minute, but we primarily do grant making and convening. And HarvardX, as you know, is really an amazing organization for experimentation in curricular design, pedagogy, and even understanding new ways that courses and content can be sequenced, but mostly in the online space. VPAL Research, headed by Dustin, is an organization that draws on the data structures from residential education and from online education to help to build tools and build a research program that can help us understand teaching and learning improvements more broadly. Out of VPAL Research came another organization, DART, Digital Assets for Reuse in Teaching, and we think DART could actually be considered a curriculum mapping project, which is a little confusing because it's an organization and it's part of another organization, but it's also one of these curricular mapping projects, which we'll say a little bit more about in a minute. So HILT's mission is catalyzing innovation and excellence in learning and teaching, and as I said, largely through grant making and convening. And I just wanted to put up the team pictures today because I hope you will be able to meet your colleagues during the reception, and because we have 3 new members of our team. We have Allison Pingree, we have Cassie McGrath, and we have Zach Kwong, who started today. Yay! great to start on a day when we have an event like this one. Each of the colleagues in HILT, and that includes Melissa Godet and Jamie Goldstein. Where's Jamie? Oh, right there. And B-Frame have been helping the overall with HILT, but I want to just say in particular that Jamie has been taking a leadership role in trying to have all of these curricular mapping projects have a kind of coherence and get the working groups together and have us work together. And so we'll send another thank you your way later. But all of their roles relate to the next steps for the university as we think through what to do with these various projects. So shifting from the kind of organizational context and the story behind us putting all of these projects together, I like to think of Dustin as a jump starter. And I actually have the visual of, you know, those like clamps you put on the dead battery, like you open the hood and you put the clamps on the dead battery and you give the jump start. And so early on when we were talking about these curricular mapping ideas, and he met Karen Wilcox and he was like, "Pep, I could do this in the Gov department. I can build something." And it seemed like the next week there was something for us to look at, and he began to iterate, and of course that early view moved into a number of different directions that he's going to talk about. But I thought because he's the jump starter, I would use the enrollment view project as a way to orient you to these slides and the way we're going to kind of try to talk through these projects. So you see on the bottom of these slides, I think I have a pointer here, this line. And it represents a rough progression of project phases. So identifying what it is you want to do, collecting data, analyzing it, exploring solutions, testing them, you know, making some short-term changes, iterating, getting more testing, and then eventually getting to where we're expanding and doing something that's more systematic. And what we've tried to do is put in red where we think these projects are now. You know, one could argue with it, but that's where what we've tried to do. And with each of these projects, we'll introduce the set of questions that motivate the work and the key constituencies. So here, what are the student patterns of course choice within the Gov department? How do they change for subgroups of students? What are the relationships between courses? What are the learning objectives for each course? And then the key constituencies, undergraduate students and the Gov department. Where do we want to be with this project 1 year from now? All FAS departments actively using a version of Enrollment View. Faculty discovering their nearest neighbor, and here we get to another curriculum mapping project, Andrew Ho, who we'll talk about this in a minute. The nearest neighbor project has now sort of integrated a little bit with the Enrollment View project. And that's where we hope these things go, is we begin to think of the synergies and the integrations. And then the hope from the particular point of view of this project for curriculum mapping at Harvard broadly, surface enrollment patterns within departments and across departments, teaching your class mindful of other classes that your students are in. And there's a pretty picture here, and I'm not going to talk about the pretty picture because Dustin's going to talk about the pretty picture now.
Thank you, Erin, for the introduction. If I'm a jump starter, I hope I'm on the positive side of the lead. So my name's Dustin Tingley. I'm a professor of government, and I'm also the faculty director of VPAL research. This is kind of a little bit of an explanation of what we do. And we have a really fortunate role in the university to straddle the online space and working with our partners in HarvardX, but also residential. And that gives us an opportunity to be aware of a variety of different approaches to education, a variety of different types of data streams that come out of those approaches, and really trying to leverage insights that come from both sides. How do we help Harvard X with what we learned from the residential space, and how do we enhance the residential space given what we know from Harvard X? I should say that this is framed around VPAL research, but in doing so, we definitely work very closely with the folks over in Hewitt who control a lot of the data systems and whatnot. And they're a huge partner, and I'm just really glad to see some folks from Hewitt here today. So what I'm going to do briefly is to just kind of lay out that Harvard has this huge, rich array of different sources of data that touch on teaching and learning. Ranging from the student information system, the course catalog, the Canvas learning management system. This is where you're running a course, you have a course website. This is where you go to find a syllabus or engage in a discussion forum or find readings, et cetera. We have student evaluation data. I'm not going to talk about any of that, but that's a really rich source of data. We have a whole range of Harvard YouTube channels. So these are official Harvard YouTube channels, and there's a lot of great content on it. We have Harvard X, and then we have a whole layer of really just being mindful of who should get access to what data and what information. I don't need to get access to all of the information that someone in institutional research can get access to. I don't need that. And so we're very mindful of thinking through authentication and just sort of permissions. And here, Harvard Key, which has really come online in a major way in the past couple years, has been really helpful for a variety of projects. So the student information system, many of you might think about this as something like my.harvard. And this is a place where students go. It's where they're going to do different registration operations, et cetera. And this is a kind of a, not just an interface for students and for faculty and for staff, but it also has a big data layer behind it, right? And that data layer is very valuable. I'll showcase a couple of the ways that we've been thinking about it. And it's not just some projects that I've worked on, but there's also been other projects that have benefited from the nice work that Hewitt has put into architecting the kind of database backend for my.harvard. So one example of this is the enrollment view. So this is literally just asking a question of what courses, if someone has taken a course in the Gov department, what were the other courses that they took, right? What sequence of courses did they take? Or to get to Andrew Ho's brilliant idea about nearest neighbors, if I'm teaching a course, what are the other courses that my students are enrolled in? That's actually really valuable information. What are they experiencing as they are going through what I want them to experience? And we'll talk a little bit more about nearest neighbor in a second. And you can think about these things. So this is going to be for the physics department. So we've been working with them as well. So I'm teaching a class. There are these other classes that students are enrolled in. You can even see the second order nearest neighbor. This is like not your neighbor, but the neighbor down the street, right? And what classes that overlap are happening there. Or what's the sequence of classes that people are taking? What have people taken before my class, and what do people statistically tend to take afterwards? And then finally, there's always questions about, like, are there trends in enrollment that we sort of, within a department, administratively look at? And so this is something that we will be rolling out to a whole range of FAS departments, working quite closely with Harvard's institutional research and our friends over in Hewitt to be able to do. Another project was just saying, let's bring together easy ways to just search course descriptions. And this was an effort that arose out of our friends in the Safra Center for Ethics, just wanting to know, where are people teaching ethics? And so we were able to, again, work with folks at Hewitt to be able to import all of the course description information that we could get, also grab some of that information for some of the other schools that aren't on my.harvard and put it in one place, make it searchable, and do all sorts of, be able to make nice, plots of different things. A challenge of, this is, it's not really a challenge, it's just sort of a reality, is that we are a little bit spread out in terms of our data systems, and that's okay, that's changing. This is a little bit of a moving target as well. This is not sort of fixed in stone. It might change in the coming months and year and whatnot, but there are some different data systems out there. We have been working a lot with sort of the my.harvard kind of backend, but there are some others out there. And one of the things that, that we do is to try to think about kind of common underlying things so that even if people have different data systems, we can kind of bring that data together and have it be meaningful to be co-located together. A final piece that really, I think, highlights the opportunities for merging data from a whole variety of systems. This is the Syllabus exploration tool. This is something that is now available to anyone in FAS. You can go to syllabus.hmdc.harvard.edu, and you can search across most of the syllabi that are used in the FAS. Okay, so how do we do that? So what's one thing that you're supposed to do on your, if you're an instructor, on your Canvas site? What's one thing that you're supposed to do? What should you do? You should post your syllabus. Okay? Now, you're going to do that in a variety of different ways because I can see that data. There are particular ways we prefer you to do it, but whatever, we'll figure it out. And so what we did is we, working very closely with Dean Mike Smith, went out and got syllabi from across all of these different courses, took those files, extracted the text from them, and then essentially made it searchable. Right? So you can go in and you can find people's syllabi and actually get the actual file that was their syllabus. And think of these syllabi as being essentially like a curated reading list. So if you're writing a senior thesis and you're interested in some topic, well, one thing you could do is you could go to Google and type in that topic, and then who knows where you're going, right? But why not, if you could, in a sense, like Google the inside of some of the most brilliant people's minds in the world and see what they would suggest reading given your topic, that would be a much greater opportunity. So the Syllabus project took information from Canvas, the learning management system on the one hand, brought it together with some other information from the operational data storage system in Hewitt, and put those things together, and now we have this as a product for FAS. And furthermore, it's been written in a way that we hope some of our friends from other schools would be interested in joining the party. So at some point, this could be something like syllabus.harvard.edu and really scale across the institution. That's a dream right now, but I'm a jump starter, so I'll leave it there.
All right, so now we're going to romp through a series of these projects. And as we do, I'm hoping that when we look at the team, the project teams, that members of those project teams will sort of stand up and turn around so that everyone else can see them, so that when we have the reception, they know who to go and talk with. This was the little exhibit to say, we're not going to talk about enrollment view because we've already talked about enrollment view. And then when we get to the physics learning outcomes, we're going to have a little deeper dive with that particular project. But we're going to start with common competencies for a master's redesign. So, Matt Miller, Becca Miller, no relation, sitting on opposite sides of the room, but working very closely with their colleagues, helped the School of Education get to a place where in May they voted successfully on a curricular reform for the master's programs at the school. And I think it took a lot of work and a lot of thinking to get there. And I want us to just imagine some of the challenges here. Like a master's student who comes to the ed school could choose one of 13 different tracks. There are about 700 that come from master's programs. And you're just on campus for 1 year. You know, how do you think about a professional school and education and imagine each of those different tracks and educating them to have the competencies to go out and do what they need to do in a bunch of different ways, in a bunch of different kinds of professions? So, you know, at the ed school, the students, as I understand it, they come in, and it's not like undergraduates coming into a core program and learning what it is that they want to do. They're professional students. They have some ideas about what they want to do, but they come from all different kinds of backgrounds, and some of Some people want to be data scientists, and some people want to be policymakers, and some people want to be educators, and some people want to be superintendents. And there's different ways that you might come in and want to use a master's program. So part of the curriculum redesign was a set of discussions about what are the core competencies that faculty can agree on should cross all of these. But how can we now, using technology, using what we understand about pedagogy, actually think through how to deliver that in a personalized, individualized way for students who come from different backgrounds and need to go into different places? So, it's a tough set of problems, and I'm focusing on it a little bit because I think it's a set of problems that many of our schools struggle with. Many of the professional schools in particular. You have people who are coming in all of these different backgrounds, and they need to go out into these different ways, but you have to, as a school, say what are these core competencies, and how might we deliver education flexibly, in individualized ways, to be able to get them through and learn from the time while they're on campus, which isn't very long. So how do we allow learners flexibility as they're attaining the same professional competencies, leverage technology and data to support diverse adult learners, prepare professionals for an evolving career in education? And the key constituents here are master's degree students, faculty, staff, and alumni. And you can see where they see this process. Goals by next year. Launch a first foundational course, How People Learn. And this is, I think, a really remarkable experiment, the How People Learn course, which I think is a collaboration with other people in VPAL and is being built right now as an individualized, flexible sort of program. And it relates to all of our interest, and many people here have an interest in what are pre-matriculation materials that could be provided before people even get on campus. So in addition, they're thinking about, as part of a kind of curriculum mapping project, learner profiles, how individual students can identify where they want to go, what their course progression looks like, and the kinds of things that they may be taking on in competencies as they go through the program, how that as a data source might relate to other data sources in the school, allowing for more visibility as you're going rapidly through a set of courses. Hopes for curriculum mapping at Harvard, collaborative exploration and innovation around personalized, competency-based professional education. So, nearest neighbors, also an ed school project. Andrew Ho. This was Andrew's brainchild, I believe, partly as GSE faculty member, partly as faculty chair of the VPAL Research Committee. And some of the questions are, who are the students that are in your class? What other classes are they taking? And what should I know from the faculty members who are teaching those classes about what they're doing in their classroom that I can leverage and optimize when I'm teaching in my classroom? How can we make it pretty easy and quick for people to learn from one another? If you begin to nurture these neighborhoods of instructors, can we create some coherency, even more coherency, and maybe some ways of teaching that make better use of people's time? So at the moment, this is being used by Hugsy faculty, but next year, your school. So, this, like some of the other projects that Dustin was talking about, it wouldn't be that hard to adapt and to move into different schools and different kinds of programs. So it's in a phase of user testing. Can people read the print on this? Yes. All right, so you can see that the way this visual works is you've got the course in the center, which is red, being your course. And you can see in the previous semester what percentage of your students were in these other classes and what percentage in the current semester were in these other classes. And you can also begin to use these data to project forward. to predict what percentage might be in other classes. And by June, full integration of this nearest neighbors visual data set with VPAL instructor tools, emails to instructors answering who's your nearest neighbor and what do good neighbors do for each other. That sounds sort of Mr. Rogers-like. Hopes for curriculum mapping at Harvard, clearer focus on the question, whose question are we answering? Yes, I agree, and how actionable is the answer? Okay, science advising. Logan. Logan is Director of Science Education, and as you can see there, has other titles as well, is an amazing instructor. And the questions here are, which structures and systems will nurture and support undergraduate research? How do we meaningfully connect undergraduate research to the curricular experience? Which skills and competencies should we be fostering and assessing from students' research experience? Science concentration advisors are a key constituency group, undergraduate students, and research mentors. And from what I understand, as you began to think about this work and this project and making research experience for undergraduates more visible to science advisors, you maybe worked with Harvard College Institutional Research, got some data, and saw that 90% of undergraduates in the life sciences have done some sort of research experience during their time at Harvard. And in the largest undergraduate biology concentrations, 70% of undergraduate research is done not at FAS, but at the School of Public Health, the medical school, and affiliated hospitals. The kinds of things that you wouldn't know unless you're making these sorts of data accessible and visible, and then into the awareness of science advisors. So this, of course, raises questions as well about the oversight, and if we're capitalizing on undergraduate research work that's being already done in the best possible way. Goals by June 2019, a mix of top-down and bottom-up data collection around undergraduate research in science, making data accessible and useful to inform advising about research and courses, and hopes for curriculum mapping at Harvard. Students make more informed decisions about the research, make more connections between research and the rest of the curriculum. I don't know how we do that, but I think it's incredibly important. And we hear all the time how important that is. How do these research experiences integrate with the rest of the curriculum? So I'm now going to step down and let us have a little break from my droning on and hear a little bit more depth from Logan and Louis about this last in this category of the curriculum mapping projects.
So in the physics department, where Louis and I are both faculty members, we were starting to get interested in questions about departmental level learning objectives and department level learning outcomes. So a little bit of history behind this. So Chris Stubbs, who recently served a term as interim chair and previously had been chair of the physics department, has long been interested in improving undergraduate education. When he was the department chair, he brought Carl Wyman to campus to talk to faculty about creating learning objectives for their courses and helping faculty to try to define what do you really want them to learn when they take electricity and magnetism or quantum mechanics or whatever that individual course is. And Chris at the time said, okay, I'm department chair, I can just wave my magic wand and make everyone make learning objectives for their courses. And of course, we know that didn't work. But Chris realized that this idea of actually defining learning objectives is a very powerful notion, that you can really articulate what it means to learn the content and skills and concepts in a course. And a few years later, when Chris was serving a term as interim chair of the department, he wondered, is there anything I can do one semester as chair that could have a lasting impact on undergraduate education in the department? And he turned to Louis Deslauriers, who is Director of Science Teaching and Learning in FAS and also a senior preceptor in our department. And Louis is one of the great experts in science education here. And Louis immediately said, well, there is something that no one else is doing, which is actually looking at the department level at learning objectives. What, as a department, are we actually teaching our physics undergraduates? And Louis said, no one's doing this at other institutions because they think it's just too hard. Okay? They think that logistically, trying to get all of the students and trying to get faculty to agree about what the department learning objectives are, these will be too challenging. So Chris said, okay, let's do it. And so this project was launched with some specially arranged help from HILT. At the HILT conference, where those of you who were there remember that Chris was presented as a guinea pig, if you will, with an opportunity for the entire HILT conference to weigh in on what Chris ought to do in his one semester as interim chair to improve teaching and learning in the department. And one of the options was create a departmental level assessment to assess teaching and learning in the department. And lo and behold, that was one of the recommendations. So with that ringing endorsement, one of the curriculum mapping projects that was started was this very project. So we wanted to know, how do we know if the department as a whole is actually successful in teaching the concepts and skills that we think are important for undergraduate success in physics and future success as they go into their careers or graduate schools? How do we actually engage faculty in thinking about departmental level learning goals? As you can imagine, that can be a contentious issue. And how do we increase our students' awareness about what they know and what they don't know? So we're looking here both at the undergraduate concentrators and at the faculty to try to understand this better. So our goals by June of next year is that we'll have, we hope, a system in place where all of our undergraduate concentrators are assessed twice, first around the end of their second year and again in their fourth year, that we have student level and departmental level interventions in response to these results, and that we can actually validate the assessment itself. This is a little snapshot of part of the assessment, which is something that we think is a very simple question, conceptual question in quantum mechanics about the eigenfunction of a Schrodinger equation for a semi-infinite, well, anyway, I won't go on. And our hopes for curriculum mapping are that in the future, when we have our curricular reforms in the physics department, we can actually target those reforms at places where we know that we need to focus in terms of outcomes, and then we can actually assess those changes on a department level. And finally, we hope that our students can actually be more confident and can articulate what the skills are that they've learned as undergraduate concentrators in physics. And now I will turn this over to Louis, who understands this all much more deeply than I do, to explain a little bit more about the details of this project.
Okay, so a little bit about the design here. So first, the test is made up of a broad range of topics, right? We want to make sure that faculty and students feel like it's quite representative of what it means to be a physicist, by the end of your fourth year. So I made sure to see as many colleagues in the department as possible to get their input. And I asked them, what do you think are the most important skills, most important concepts that your students, should master by the time they get out of the program? And I got a lot of feedback, obviously. But one thing that was common, feedback that was common to everyone, was about they wanted to make sure that this assessment did not look just like a final exam, at the end of a course, which in physics oftentimes, involve end of the chapter, end of the textbook problem. So they didn't want the exam to look like that. And that's why if you look at the assessment, we have some practical lab physics questions on there. We have even some open-ended questions. So it really does feel quite different. But most importantly, I wanted to make sure that it only had conceptual questions. And it's well known now in science education that the retention of concepts is quite robust over time when you compare that to retention of facts. Facts like procedures, steps that you need to solve an equation or something, that's just forgotten almost at the same rate as a phone number or someone's name, right? In fact, several years ago, we published something where we looked at how students retain quantum mechanics concepts. At the end of their first quantum mechanics course, students were given a test of learning, and the test of learning comprised deeply conceptual questions as well as procedures, right? So a year and a half later, we gave them the same test of learning, and we made sure that they had no exposure to quantum mechanics in between. And interestingly, the concept was retained almost at 100%. Okay, the deeply conceptual ideas, but the facts, procedures, not surprisingly, they had decayed almost to zero, to noise level. So that's why I wanted to make sure that the feedback that this test would give us, faculty and students, was meaningful. So in fact, you'll see when I talk about student interviews here, not a single student said, oh, I learned this before, but I think I did not answer it correctly because I forgot. Because people know intuitively these questions. If you just don't know how to answer them a year later, that's because you didn't learn it in the first place. So that's a very important part of the design. So I tried to use as many validated questions as possible. You know, I called my colleagues out of the universities, but we could only use a few. So this assessment will have to be validated this year. So let's talk about results a little bit. Students did not perform as well as they hoped. So with an average of 46%, and the distribution was pretty wide. So now you should know, if you ask, is this test too hard? Well, I started to give it to graduate students, so they score a lot higher, but still not that great. Much worse than they would like. And I just got the green light, I think, in the last faculty meeting that we had, to start giving it to my colleagues. Anyway, it'll be anonymous, right? I'll say I'm the only one that has the key, right? So I'll be able to get favors from people. So here's what's really interesting here. You know, everyone, no exception, expected to get an A on this test, and they were all very disappointed. So that's a bit of a downer, right? Very disappointed, in fact, to the point where I was quite concerned with the few first students. But I interviewed every student. So I made them one-on-one. And part of the script at the beginning for the interview was about, their perception of fairness for the test. I asked them, is the test fair in your opinion? And, I just let them talk. Then after that, I provide them with a definition we can both agree on for fairness. The definition I gave them is that I said, let's imagine that, for example, the questions on quantum mechanics for this test, let's say that you had been asked those questions at the end of your course where you learned quantum mechanics. Would it be fair for the instructor in the course to expect you to get all these questions right? And without exception, students said, yes, absolutely. At the end of a course in quantum mechanics, I should get those quantum mechanics questions right. So they did feel like the test was fair. So it was very disappointed to them. But on the upside, students really did appreciate the feedback. Many of them went out of their ways to thank me, to say, oh, I'm so glad that the department is spending a lot of time and energy, to give me additional feedback. And many of them asked, okay, what can I do practically now? These are students that are about to graduate, right, in fourth year. So they said, I only got a few months before I go to graduate school. What can I do? Give me some advice. So it's pretty clear that we can't just give this assessment and leave it at that, right? We need to provide students with opportunities to bridge some of the gaps. So another upside of the assessment can definitely help students, improve their self-awareness as they progress through the program. And that's in addition, of course, to helping us improve teaching and learning in our department. So something that's very interesting here as part of the interviews is I asked students, what is it that made you think that you should have gotten an A on this test? And not all of them, but almost all of them did talk about their grades. They said, well, it's too bad. The only feedback that I get from the program are my grades. And I did pretty good in my classes. So that's why I would have assumed that I would do well on something like that. So that was the source of their disappointment, basically. So as Logan mentioned, that's, when you think about this, that's pretty backward way to design things, right? You're supposed to do learning outcomes first. And then from that, you're supposed to build an assessment, right? But we know it practically just doesn't work that way. Well, you should have seen this in the faculty meeting, the last one that we had. People were really engaged, right? So that might be a good way to trick faculty into starting to talk about these things. So the next steps here for this coming year is, of course, we need to design, follow-up opportunities for students. Some seminar-type courses. We're bouncing ideas, what we should do. We need to revise and validate the assessment, and that'll involve a lot of interviews. So I want to make sure that we make this available to everyone around the world so they can use this instrument. And Karen Pierce from Institutional Research is already helping us now with looking at correlations with other institutional data. For example, what courses did students take? What grades did they take? And does that, inform, their performance on this test? And then finally, and not the least, is we need to develop sustainable way to give that to students. So we want to give it at the end of second year and at the end of fourth year. So students did mention in interviews, I wish I would have had something like this 2 years ago. So I would have been able to make some corrections. It's too bad. So giving it at the end of second year, that's easy. I would think, not just in physics, but in most departments, because we have core courses, right? Like this fall semester, I'm teaching quantum mechanics, and every student have to go through quantum mechanics. So I'm going to give it to students at the end of the course. That's easy. But at the end of fourth year, though, that's a serious issue. This semester was really hard, to communicate with each student individually and schedule time and so forth.
Can you imagine a world where that was happening in every department? All right, so we're gonna move on to a different category, and we're gonna go in this order, and then at the end, we're gonna have a little more depth about the Social Innovation Project. So, I love this project. It's the project that when everyone says to me, what is curriculum mapping, it's the one that I bring up, because it's just so clear. Like if you said across the university, what are all of the courses, all the ways that ethics is being taught? It's probably taught in every Harvard school. How do we know where the ethics courses are? So the team, which you can see here, Daniel Allen couldn't be here, Jess Miner, Michael Blau, David Comer-Kidd, they have been working really hard. And as I understand it, you took kind of inductive and deductive approaches both to narrowing in on the range of many words that could be related to ethics instruction. And then you use that to develop a kind of weighted algorithm, and then use that weighted algorithm to search all of the syllabi, and then to identify courses, survey instructors, get their teaching and learning materials that then become additional sources of data to draw out the implicit learning theories around ethics, and to begin to think about not just which courses, but the pedagogical approaches to teaching ethics, and how to develop a community here around those issues, and then broaden that community outside of Harvard and think about ethics instruction out there in the world and in other institutions. Key constituents, undergraduate and professional students, faculty, instructors, and administrators, that's the whole university. I think you could add alumni. I do think it does have that sort of applicability. So look at this visual, how many courses were identified. That's a lot of courses. Then there's how many were selected out of that, and unique instructors. And look at how many survey responses they got. This is already a community. By next year, the goal is to do another round of faculty surveys, refine and administer the pre- and post-semester student surveys, so now learning from students, and test and transfer the methodology to other campuses. And hopes for curriculum mapping at Harvard, build student-friendly tools for identifying ethics courses and learning opportunities. What do student-friendly tools look like? We'll be getting to that because I think Jeffrey and others in the Curricle project are also thinking about student-friendly kinds of tools. Identify strengths and gaps in ethics education at Harvard, promote discussion and collaboration. Similarly, Subu, faculty member in the School of Public Health, had another kind of question that was crossing instruction all across Harvard. Who's teaching applied quantitative methods? What are the applied statistics courses that are being taught in social sciences by non-statisticians? How do these courses compare? How do students move through the system to take courses in applied statistics? And people do move. They don't just stick in their school, they move to other schools to try to get the methodological training that they feel that they need. Graduate students are the key constituency here, and then faculty. by next year, have a web resource to facilitate optimal course selection for students, a synthesis-based deep dive of what's being taught at Harvard with an aim to develop a taxonomy of these courses. That's a big goal. It should be an interesting one. And again, it will be drawing on the data sources of syllabi and course materials. Subu or Judy might remember, like, as we identified these courses, reached out to faculty and said, hey, could you send us our syllabi? Because we couldn't use Syllabus tool because it was not just in the FAS. Within an hour, you had like hundreds of people, or a lot of people writing. There is a hunger among the faculty to be able to share their resources with one another and to build this kind of community. So, one of the goals is just making this meaningful faculty connections and then providing more course selection support to students. If you look at this visual, you can see the percentage of the applied quantitative methods by school, but we don't know if this picture is accurate. We really don't know. I think this is a first stab, and then we have to iterate and learn to what degree this might change over time. Curricle is this amazing intellectual project, and when I first heard about it, my jaw almost dropped. I really couldn't believe that this ambitious effort was underway. We have Jeffrey. Matthew Battles couldn't be here. Sebastian, we have Jessica. Kim here from the team. And you can see here we've got these two different, they're both doing user testing and still collecting data. As I have thought about this project, there's sort of two parts of it. One is building a curiosity-driven search tool for students. And the other is drawing on really interesting archival data about the intellectual, curricular story of Harvard over time. I mean, going back the hundreds of years of the things that have been taught at Harvard to say, how has Dante's Inferno been taught throughout Harvard's history, and to develop these kind of stories of a student's progression while they were here that might get students to think in different kinds of ways than they usually do about their own progression and path through the curriculum. So I think it's an ambitious project because there's a lot of data that might not be digitized and easily put into a format where you could do that kind of deep work. At the same time, it really relates to a lot of the tools that Dustin has been building. And as we, in a more straightforward way, are building these tools and increasing data sources, we can pull it together with the things that Jeffrey and others have been working on. So research questions: how might data visualization reveal hidden connections among courses of study? How might we provide students with meaningful data in a user-friendly format to support them in course selection? Using and adapting historical curriculum data, what stories can we tell about intellectual and curricular trends throughout Harvard's history? Students, faculty, department chairs as key constituents. Goals by June 2019, 1 full academic year of public prototype testing completed. I think, tell me if this is right, you're in prototype testing now. Yeah. Suite of visualization micro-narratives published and a mobile version in demo. Hopes for curriculum mapping at Harvard: visualization and data integration will promote discovery and course selection. Visualizations can show connections. Now, how in the world, I was looking at this visual and was like, wait, are these the schools that tell the truth? And these are the schools that are, and so I had to get some clarification. No, this tool allows you to put in any 2 words and then see which schools have courses that offer things related to those words, overlapping, and then if you click on one of those in the middle, this is already an interface, a tool that you can play with, then you get to actually see all the list of courses and the ways in which they're talking about either truth or lie. All right. DART. I cannot do this project justice. I think you can't do it justice in this sort of format. What you need to do is actually play with this and have a demo. You need to go and look at this. There's a website, and I should just say, on the little brochures we handed out, there's a website you can go and learn more information about these tools. Also, you can go and look up DART in particular. So imagine this repository where you can put teaching and learning assets of any number of sizes and shapes. Right now, the content has started with HarvardX data, HarvardX videos, and other assets that are in HarvardX courses, as well as Harvard YouTube video assets. But it could include any kinds of teaching and learning assets. And then it's this really powerful search tool. So you search for a word that you're interested in. I think the demos I've seen have been like moon, and all of the things that are related to moon come up. And you can do a little preview really quickly of what these things look like. Then, most magically, you just say, I want to put this in my Canvas course. Boom. It's in your Canvas course, and you can use it and share it with your students. So it is a work in progress right now. As I understand it, the more that Daniel can get people to use it and give feedback, the more he can build new attributes and new tools. So you should talk with Daniel, you should play with it, and you should talk with Daniel, and you should begin to see what else he can do to help you use this tool more over time. By June 2019, cross-institutional content sharing and more direct reuse of Canvas resources. So now it's going the other direction. You have Canvas resources, make it usable for everybody to then put into their Canvas courses. This is what the interface looks like. Hopes for curriculum mapping at Harvard provide data and tools that allow people to more directly explore Harvard content. We're going to now hear from Brittany for this last of our curriculum mapping projects.
Okay, so hi, I'm Brittany Butler. I'm the Executive Director of the Social Innovation and Change Initiative, which is a relatively new initiative, almost 2 years old at the Kennedy School, and an adjunct lecturer there. And I'm representing our team, the SciC team, as well as my colleague, Julie Bottolano, who's a professor at both HBS and HKS. So I have to say, we're maybe the team that joined this group the latest, and thus got to benefit on riding the coattails of the ethics group, of the search tool, of the fact that there will very soon now be this syllabus search tool, because that's sort of our next step. And so thank you actually to HILT for involving us. We started out, well, so the mission of the Social Innovation and Change Initiative at the Kennedy School is to generate new knowledge and also to shape the practice of innovation with a social intent. So not innovation to make a profit, not innovation for its own sake, but to solve a specific social problem. And we entered into this work essentially because anecdotally the student demand was just like blasting up. So our team was immediately overwhelmed by the number of students coming in and asking for advice about which courses they should take, asking about the iLab, asking about Hive, asking about all the competitions on campus and how they should be navigating those things. So this is really we entered with a set of questions about the curriculum, but also a set of questions about extracurricular activities and how those overlapped. And the thing about social innovation, unlike many of the things that have been described here, but I think this is an increasing trend also in higher ed, is it's not actually a discipline. At best, it's a phenomena inside of certain disciplines. And yet, you know, year after year, the interest from students keeps rising. And as we talk to students about sort of what they want and how they want to make a difference in the world, they say, look, there's this specific social problem I care about, and what's the scope and sequence that I should be thinking through as I prepare myself to go out there and do this? And so we had terrible answers for them. And so like very basic level, we just wanted to know, is this the thing? Yeah, what courses are being taught? What out-of-class innovation experiences are offered? And how do the perceptions and experiences and sort of demand from the students and external actors about what's available actually compare to the supply? I mean, we just didn't know anything about this. And so we are very much in this stage and looking to go deeper soon. So again, this is where we started. So there was a report done in 2013 that gave us some indication that 36% of cross-registration petitions across all the school So this is like a student making an extra effort to go into another school because they perceive that there's something at another school that isn't available in their own. 30% of those fall into this category. And many of the students who made those petitions were denied. So we know there's interest. Just locally, again, the anecdotes were there. And then on the supply side, I mean, very spotty, but the challenge for us also was it was difficult to answer questions for prospective students. And at the Kennedy School and at the business school in particular, we were feeling the pain of actually losing prospective students, because even though we had this intuition that as a whole, Harvard University offers an incredible amount on this front, we weren't able to represent that well, and that was scaring us. And then at the same time, the students who were pursuing this stuff would say, like I've already taken, sort of that first quote that you started with, there's a lot of overlap between these two classes, and I really wish someone could have given me a heads up about that, because I don't feel like I'm optimizing my time here. So that's how we started. But as we move forward, some additional questions surface that, again, I think are important as folks particularly think about multidisciplinary initiatives, or initiatives that aren't, clearly in a discipline. But where student demand is high, which is, what is Harvard's responsibility to get clear about this stuff, given that social innovation, social change aren't, traditional academic disciplines? And that's an open question, but it's something that increasingly every year it feels like we need to answer. And what can and should be accomplished through the curricular versus the co-curricular. So the Social Innovation and Change Initiative actually runs a fellowship program. It's a co-curricular program for 15 select students every year who are working on advancing a project that they plan to continue when they graduate. They can get up to $30,000 to advance those projects when they finish. But is that the only experience that they should be getting here in the school? And how does that relate to what's happening in the classroom? So very much along the lines of what's going on with the research stuff and how much is that shaping students' experience here? It's something we want to understand better. And then what opportunities are we missing? And it just seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we don't really understand yet. So this is just a quick sense of sort of how we approached putting our arms around this space and even just defining what we're talking about. Lucas, you spent a lot of time on this. So just a sample. This is just a sample. There are 521 unique courses, okay? So that's sort of on the next slide, but this is just a sample. So, and look at the range. Innovators practice finding, building, leading good ideas. Applied music activism. Thermal tectonics for the next billion people. Designing for the just city. Innovative approaches to teacher prep, innovation in ministry. I mean, these are all processes that certainly aren't 100% overlapping, but where you can really quickly come to understand that you need to be able to define the problem, right? There's a set of competencies here that each of these students sort of need to get. You need to understand the root causes of those problems. You need to be able to iterate and sort of think in an iterative learning way about potential solutions and make selections about those solutions. And you need to understand your own role as a social change maker. And so despite the fact that they're all across different schools and potentially different in many ways, there's actually a lot of similarities, and that's what we wanted to start to understand. This is a set of key words. So we followed again on the coattails of the ethics folks and did this sort of iterative process of looking for keywords in the course descriptions. We would have loved to have been able to drill down to the level of the syllabi, because we suspect that when we talk about the competencies required to be an effective social innovator, it might be happening at that sort of syllabus level. And when we get there, we will do that. But in the meantime, it just gives you a sense of the range of search terms that came up for us, and then we would feed those back in to the system, and Killy came to this 521. And so, yeah, for next year, I mean, in terms of what kind of resources can we use to support students and faculty and creating a community and finding their way, we've been thinking about a compendium of curricula. We think that just would be an interesting contribution also beyond Harvard, and that would then draw folks into the conversation broadly. Oh, this is our big takeaway, which is that pretty much every single school is offering courses on this front. I mean, and it's really pretty well distributed. There's like an other group here that represents a couple of the schools. But again, this, just like Erin said about the other, this is our first cut at a snapshot. We're still trying to figure out even what the bounds are. And so a step for us, next step for us will also be, connecting with relevant faculty who are interested in this work, particularly faculty who have sort of an experiential learning pedagogy. They seem to be very drawn to this, and ask them for reactions to the set of courses we've surfaced. And then eventually just make recommendations to improve the student pathway for making social impact. I mean, many of them come here and say that's kind of why they're getting an education now. And so how can we prepare them to do that well? And then hopes, yeah, I mean, just that, again, the multidisciplinary learning journey in particular can be a little easier for students. Right now, we're very siloed. I think we all know that. And they feel it the most. And then creating connection between faculty and students who would benefit from working with each other. I mean, even on this project, I feel like I've connected with some of you who might not have identified as falling into social innovation, but when we get down to the nitty-gritty, I think we're actually grappling with a lot of similar questions. And this idea of developing sort of a one Harvard ecosystem, especially when resources are distributed across schools. So the Kennedy School cannot own social innovation, and we know that. But Harvard as a whole really could be a dominant player in this space if we could coordinate. So there are certain topics where no department, no school is going to be able to really shape a field, but together we might be able to do quite a bit. So that's where we're at.